You know how it is. You're working with some older kid. Maybe you're thinking about moving it to the cloud or just trying to modernize it.
Yep.
And you run into this wall.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we even begin to translate this from, language A to language B
Right.
and do it safely, without introducing a bunch of new issues?
Right. I mean, it comes up more and more often these days.
Totally.
Luckily, some new research is addressing it
Huh.
head on, and it's pretty cool stuff.
Oh, cool.
We've been digging into this new paper, just came out, preprint actually,
Okay.
called Collaboration is All You Need, LLM-Assisted Safe Code Translation.
I like the title.
It's from March 17th, 2025,
Mm-hmm.
and it introduces this framework, Unitranslator, that, well, takes a whole new approach to code translation.
Unit translator. Okay, so is this like, we need one mega LLM, one huge brain to just handle all of this?
Actually, no.
Okay.
That's what makes it so different.
Okay.
The idea is that instead of one massive model, you have a bunch of smaller LLMs, each one kind of specialized,
Uh-huh.
and they work together.
Hmm.
Like, think of it as a team. So you've
Okay.
got different experts,
Right.
each one bringing something unique to the table.
So like a diverse team, instead of just one person trying to do it all.
Exactly. And what the Unitranslator research shows is that this can actually lead to more efficient translation
Okay.
and more accurate, too, which is obviously crucial.
Yeah, totally. So today, our deep dive is all about Unitranslator.
Yeah.
We're going to take a look under the hood and see how it works, what makes it so different from everything else out there, and why this whole multi-agent system could be a big deal for code translation.
It's really cutting-edge stuff.
Yeah, it's like a fast track to
Yeah.
understanding this whole new world of code translation.
Exactly.
So before we get into the specifics of Unitranslator, maybe we should talk about the limitations of what we have now.
Yeah, good point.
Like, what are the problems that Unitranslator is trying to solve?
Right. Well, a lot of current methods are based on these huge LLMs, right?
Yeah.
And there's some issues with that.
Okay.
Like, first off, these models are massive
Oh, yeah.
and computationally expensive to run. I
Mm.
mean, they take a ton of processing power.
Yeah.
Not everyone has access to that.
Right.
The paper actually references some earlier research on this by Xie et al.
Oh.
And Pan et al.
Mm-hmm.
From 2024.
Okay.
They pointed out some of these challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is, a lot of these big LLMs are really optimized for, just a handful of popular languages.
That's the usual suspect.
Exactly. So if you're working with a less common language,
Right.
it can be really difficult to find a good translation tool.
Yeah, it's like having a translator who's fluent in a few languages, but then you throw something else at them,
Exactly.
then they're lost.
Yeah, exactly. They can handle English, French, Spanish,
Right.
but anything beyond that,
Yeah.
and you're out of luck.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're dealing with code, those less common languages or even just specific dialects, they can really throw a wrench in the works.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, a big part of the motivation behind Unitranslator.
Right. So what's the vision here? What are they trying to achieve?
They're aiming for a world where code translation is accessible to everyone,
Hmm.
and it's super efficient and accurate.
Yeah.
No matter how complex the languages are.
So it's not just about translating, it's about doing it really, really well.
That's the goal. It's about democratizing access to these advanced tools,
Right, like leveling the playing field.
Exactly.
So how does Unitranslator actually do this whole multi-agent thing? Can you break it down a bit?
Sure. So think of it like assembling a team for a specific project,
Right.
right?
Okay.
You wouldn't just hire anyone. You'd want people with the right skills.
Yeah. Specialists.
Right. So in Unitranslator, you have all these specialized LLM agents.
Okay.
Each one focuses on a different part of the translation process.
Got it.
And they're all coordinated by this central LLM called the director.
The director. Okay.
So the director is like the project manager.
Mm-hmm.
It figures out what needs to be done and then assigns the right agents to handle each task.
Right. So it's not just throwing a bunch of LLMs at the problem and hoping for the best.
No, it's much more strategic than
There's actual orchestration happening.
Exactly.
Okay. So who are some of the key players on this team, these specialized agents?
Well, one of the most important ones is the NLI-based claim checker.
NLI. Okay.
That stands for natural language inference.
Okay.
Basically, this agent's job is to make sure the meaning of the code doesn't get lost in translation.
Oh, that's important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like a quality control expert.
Mm-hmm.
It looks for errors where the LLM might generate code that looks right, syntactically.
Yeah.
But it's actually wrong. Like, it doesn't make sense in the target language,
Okay.
or it introduces some kind of logical error.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they call these code hallucinations.
Code hallucinations. I like that.
Yeah. It's basically like the LLM is making stuff up,
Right.
creating functions that don't exist, or changing the logic of the program.
So this claim checker, it's like, hold on, that doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
Catches those mistakes.
Yep. And what's really cool is the claim checker uses NLI models that have been trained on official documentation
Oh, interesting.
for different programming languages.
So it's not just going off the LLM's general knowledge, it's actually looking at the rule book.
Yeah, exactly. They're leveraging research like that from Hanovich et al. Back in 2022.
Okay.
So it's grounded in the real specifications of these languages.
That's a clever way to catch potential problems. But what about understanding the ideas behind the code?
Right. That's where the concept agent comes in.
Okay.
This agent is also an LLM, but it's not focused on a specific language. It's been trained on all sorts of programming textbooks and documentation.
Okay.
So it's really good at understanding the fundamental concepts of programming.
Right. Not just the syntax, but like the why behind the code.
Exactly. And that allows Unitranslator to create translations that aren't just grammatically correct, but they actually capture the intended functionality.
Right. So it's not just about translating word for word, it's about preserving the meaning.
Precisely. And that's especially important when you're translating between languages that have different programming paradigms.
Right. Like different ways of thinking about how to solve a problem.
Exactly.
So the concept agent is like the philosopher of the team.
I like that. Yeah, it brings that deeper level of understanding.
Okay, so we have the claim checker, the concept agent. What other agents are involved in this whole process?
Well, then there's the LLM quorum.
Okay, cool.
There's like a pool of LLMs.
Okay.
And each one is specialized in a particular programming language.
Right.
So when there's a translation task, the director LLM can pick the best agents for the job.
Based on the languages involved?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if you need to translate from Python to Java, the director would choose agents that are really good at those two languages.
Right, so it's like having a team of translators, each fluent in a specific language pair.
Exactly. And then there's also this thing called dynamic prompt generation.
Dynamic prompt generation, okay.
Which is basically how the director LLM gives instructions to the agents.
Right.
It crafts very specific prompts tailored to each agent's expertise and the part of the code they're working on.
So it's not just like, here's the code, translate it.
No, it's much more nuanced than that.
There's a real guidance happening. Okay, so we have all these specialized agents and a way to give them very specific instructions, but we also need a way to make sure the translated code actually works, right?
Absolutely. That's where the compiler suite comes in.
Compiler suite.
Yeah, this is basically a collection of compilers for all the different languages that Unitranslator supports.
Right.
So it can actually compile the translated code and see if it runs without errors.
Oh, that's smart. So it's like having a built-in testing environment.
Yeah.
Exactly. Real-time validation.
Right. So we have all these different pieces, the NLI checker, the concept agent, the quorum of language specialists, the compiler suite. But how does the director LLM actually manage all of this? It seems pretty complex.
It is complex, but the director is really the mastermind behind the whole operation.
Okay.
So first, it looks at the code that needs to be translated and figures out how complex it is. Based on that, it decides which agents to bring in from the quorum
Right.
and which other specialists are needed.
Okay.
Then it assigns those agents to specific tasks, gives them their instructions through these dynamic prompts, and keeps an eye on the feedback coming from the different components, like the claim checker and the compiler suite.
So it's constantly monitoring the process,
Yeah.
making adjustments as needed.
Exactly. And that feedback loop is really important because it allows the director to fine-tune the translation and make sure it's as accurate as possible.
Right. And you mentioned that the agent selection isn't fixed, right?
That's right. It's dynamic. How does that work?
Well, the director uses a few different techniques.
Okay.
One is called few-shot prompting,
Okay.
which is basically giving the agents a few examples of good translations
Okay.
to help them learn the style and the nuances of the target language.
Like, here's how we do things around here.
Exactly. But the director also keeps track of how each agent is performing, and it can adjust its strategy based on that.
Okay.
So, for example, the concept agent might create a kind of blueprint of the code's logic,
Right.
and then the language specialists in the quorum would review that and suggest improvements based on their knowledge of the target language.
So it's a collaborative process.
Very much so. It's
Yep.
like a back and forth between experts.
And the feedback from the compiler must be really helpful in catching those little errors that can slip through.
Oh, yeah, that's crucial.
Can you tell us a bit more about how that feedback mechanism works?
Sure. So there's another agent involved here called the code understanding agent.
Code understanding.
Yeah. Its job is to look at the output from the compiler suite,
Okay.
like if there are any error messages or warnings,
Mm-hmm.
and try and figure out what caused them.
Right.
And then it gives specific hints to the code agents on how to fix those errors.
So it's like a debugger, but for the translation process itself.
Exactly. It helps to refine the translation iteratively.
So, you run the code through the compiler, you get some feedback, you make some adjustments, and you keep going until it's all clean.
Exactly. That's the goal. And this whole approach is really designed to avoid some of the common pitfalls we see in automated code translation.
Right, like what kind of pitfalls?
Well, sometimes the translated code might violate the rules of the target language,
Okay.
or it might just copy the syntax without really understanding the underlying logic.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's issues like API mismatches,
Right.
or even cases where important parts of the code accidentally get removed in the translation.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, those are all things you want to avoid. And the multi-agent system in Unitranslator is specifically designed to address these problems.
Okay, so how does it do that?
Well, because you have all these specialized agents,
Mm-hmm.
each one is kind of looking for different types of errors.
Right.
The NLI claim checker is focused on making sure the meaning stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
The concept agent is all about translating the logic correctly.
Yeah.
The language specialist makes sure the code follows the conventions of the target language.
Okay.
And the compiler feedback helps to catch those functional errors and make sure nothing important is missing.
So it's like having multiple layers of quality control.
Exactly. It's a much more robust approach than just using a single general-purpose LLM.
Okay, so we've talked about all the different pieces, but can you give us a sort of bird's eye view of the whole workflow?
Yeah.
Like from start to finish, how does the translation actually happen?
So it starts with the director LLM, right?
Mm-hmm.
It analyzes the input code and chooses an initial LLM from the quorum based on the languages involved.
Right.
That LLM does the first pass at the translation.
Okay.
And then the translated code goes through this, like a decision loop.
A decision loop. Okay.
Yeah, where it's examined by a whole bunch of different agents.
Right.
We can think of it as like the agent garden.
The Agent Garden. I like that.
Yeah, so in the agent garden, you have things like a code explainer, which tries to put the functionality of the code into words,
Okay.
and a concept verifier, which makes sure the core concepts have been translated correctly,
Right.
and a fact checker, which uses NLI to check for consistency with the original code,
Mm.
and even a test generator, which creates tests to see how the translated code behaves.
Wow. That's thorough.
It is. So all that feedback from the agent garden, along with the results from the compiler suite, goes back to the director.
Okay.
And based on all that, the director might decide to try a different LLM from the quorum.
Right.
Or it might tell the current LLM to make some refinements.
Okay.
And this process keeps going, this cycle of analysis and feedback and refinement, until the translation meets certain quality standards.
Wow. So it's not just a one and done thing. There's a lot of iteration happening.
Definitely. It's very iterative.
So it's like the code has to pass a series of tests before it's considered a good translation,
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
like an audit process.
Exactly.
Now, the paper also talks about some preliminary results from testing Unitranslator.
Right.
What were some of the key findings?
Well, the results were really encouraging, actually.
Okay, good.
What's interesting is that Unitranslator, even though it uses relatively small open source LLMs from the Gemma family,
Okay.
it was able to get results that were often as good as or even better than much larger models.
Really?
Yeah, like GPT-4, for example.
That's surprising.
It is. And it really highlights the power of this collaborative approach.
Right. So you don't necessarily need the biggest, most expensive model to get good results.
Exactly. And it goes back to the research question, harnessing collective intelligence.
Right. So were there any specific language pairs where Unitranslators really stood out?
Yeah, there were. So table 1 in the paper shows the success rates for different language pairs.
Okay.
And Unitranslator did particularly well with Go and Java,
Oh, interesting.
both translating to and from those languages.
Okay.
And in some cases, it actually outperformed GPT-4 on those translations.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is. And it really shows how effective their concept-driven translation strategy is.
Right, because Go and Java are pretty popular languages, and they have their own quirks.
Absolutely. So being able to translate them well is a big deal.
Yeah. Were there any other interesting results?
Yeah, definitely. So table 2 in the paper focuses on translating Solidity smart contracts to the Move language.
Okay, Solidity to Move.
And that's a really tough one, actually.
Oh, why is that?
Well, both languages have their own unique features and paradigms, so it's tricky to translate between them accurately.
Okay.
But Unitranslator was able to translate a much higher percentage of the test cases compared to SoulMover.
SoulMover.
Yeah, that's a specialized tool that's specifically designed for translating Solidity to Move.
Okay.
So the fact that Unitranslator did better is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it shows it can handle even really complex language combinations.
Right.
What about more general benchmarks? Did they test it on any of those?
Yeah, they did. They used the Excel cost benchmark,
Excel cost too, okay.
which is a pretty standard benchmark for cross-lingual code intelligence.
Okay.
And the results were interesting.
Okay.
The performance varied a bit depending on the language pair, but Unitranslator did particularly well when translating to Python.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it often outperformed other models on those translations.
Okay.
Now, it's important to note that it wasn't always the best across all the language pairs in XLCost-T,
Right.
so there's still room for improvement.
Yeah.
But overall, the results were very promising.
So, big picture, it sounds like this collaborative strategy using these smaller specialized LLMs, it can be really effective.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the main takeaways.
What else did the researchers emphasize?
Well, they really highlighted the importance of incorporating explicit programming knowledge.
Right, like they did with the concept agent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also the value of iterative refinement, using that feedback loop to improve the translation.
So it's not just about the LLMs themselves, it's about how you use them,
Exactly.
that you design the whole system around them.
Right.
So what are some of the future directions for this research? What are they planning to work on next?
Well, they want to expand the language coverage.
Okay, make it work for more languages?
Exactly, especially those less common languages that
Yeah.
don't have a lot of tools available.
Right.
And they also want to improve the specialization of the agents.
Okay, so even more focused expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe agents that are really good at translating specific types of code.
Yeah, exactly. Or agents that are experts in certain programming paradigms.
Interesting. What else?
They also want to develop more adaptive learning mechanisms.
Okay, so the system can keep learning and improving over time.
Exactly. And they're also looking at ways to integrate Unitranslator with existing developer tools.
Right, make it more practical for everyday use.
Exactly.
So it's not just a research project. They actually want to see it used in the real world.
Yeah, that's definitely the goal. And one more thing they mentioned
Okay.
is this idea of model plus agent recipe recommendation.
Model plus agent recipe recommendation.
Yeah, basically, they want to develop guidelines for choosing the best combination of LLMs and agents for different translation tasks.
Oh, interesting. So like a cookbook for code translation?
Yeah, kind of, based on lots of testing and benchmarking.
So to sum it all up, the big innovation here is this collaborative, multi-agent approach to code translation.
Right.
Instead of one giant LLM, we have a team of specialized AI agents working together.
And it seems to be working really well.
Yeah, it's a pretty elegant solution.
It is. And the takeaway is that you don't always need the biggest, most powerful model to get great results.
Right, sometimes it's about teamwork.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The aha moment is realizing that a well-coordinated team of specialists can actually outperform a single generalist model.
It's like the old saying, two heads are better than one.
Exactly.
So for our listeners out there, what could be the impact of this kind of technology?
Oh, I think the potential is huge.
Okay.
I mean, it can make it much easier to modernize older software systems
Right.
and move things to the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And it could also lead to better support for a wider range of programming languages.
Including those less common ones that are often overlooked.
Exactly.
So one last thought for everyone to chew on. This idea of collaboration and specialization can work so well for something as complex as code translation. Where else might we see similar approaches emerge in the world of AI? What other problems could we solve by harnessing this kind of collective intelligence? It really makes you think about the possibilities.
It does.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to think about what the future holds.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what they come up with next.
Me too.